such a lousy night, the night before Halloween, when everybody thought we would have beautiful weather, but we don't. So I'm Drew Irvin. I'm the village administrator here in Lake Bluff, and I really appreciate everyone coming out. And this does not have to be an extended conversation, but it needs to be a conversation that needs to start in Lake Bluff. And I'll wait a minute here. Thanks for coming, everybody. So tonight's conversation is very informal. And frankly, I feel bad that I'm sitting here behind this dais like this. But it's very informal. We're here to learn about a few topics, one being missing middle, and the second being a competition that was held in that regard and when Lake Bluff participated in. But this all gets back to the village's strategic plan. That's a community-wide document that was created a few years back, and one of the elements in there talks about the village having engaging the community in leadership's review of a diversity of housing in the community, and that this is part of that conversation. Hey, Jill. So I'll get started here, and the village holds workshops like these periodically to discuss new programs, policies, and initiatives. And again, they're very informal. Tonight's focusing on missing middle. And the competition itself, the goal of that competition was to bring new ideas to real sites in Illinois, and I'll go through that with you, kind of the goals of that competition, but really kind of start off by defining what missing middle is, do an overview of the competition itself, and then we were very fortunate this evening to have the two firms that submitted projects for the Lake Bluff site to actually present what they submitted as part of the competition. Hey, Dave, welcome. And we also have two resident architects here that will serve as our panel that can kind of start the conversation, but again, it's going to be very informal, and I hope there's a lot of good exchanges. But let me introduce these two gentlemen really quickly. First is Robert Douglas. Rob, as most people know him here in town, has started Lake Effect Architects back in 1996 to offer complete services for high-end residential, custom homes, and commercial architecture. Philosophically, Rob believes that all projects, regardless of size, are recognized for their own unique characteristics. His emphasis on the following principles: clear design process, team approach, context, craft, and detail can be seen in his residential projects in Lake Bluff and his commercial work here on Block 1 and with the Village Commons and the Village Market Building. Prior to establishing his own firm, Rob was Vice President for Development of Conway Farms and held the position of Associate Architect with Eifler & Associates and Booth Hansen & Associates. He holds a Master's in Architecture from University of Illinois at Chicago and a BA from Macalester College. Thanks for being here, Rob. Also is Scott Stratoff. Scott is the founder of Lake Forest-based design build practice, providing extraordinary service in the architectural design and construction of carefully crafted projects. Founded in January of 2000, Scott's firm has established a solid foundation with steady growth and notoriety with his specialization in new infill homes, significant renovation additions, and historic preservation projects, generally in the North Shore area. Scott's professional experience began when he worked for Bleetz Development of Evanston, followed by work at John Hagana and Associates in Kenilworth, and then with the Polton Group in Lake Forest, and finally Traditional Concepts Lake Bluff before starting his own firm. Scott holds a Bachelor's of Architecture from Iowa State and is affiliated with numerous professional associations. Our third panelist, unfortunately, contacted us late this evening and said he was unable to make it. He was ill, so we wish Larry that he gets better soon. So again, this is the agenda for tonight's conversation. I'll start off by talking about what is missing middle. How many people here are familiar with the term missing middle housing? Raise show of hands if you've heard of it before. Okay, a few of us, great. Missing middle housing is a range of multi-unit or clustered housing types that are compatible in scale with detached single-family homes, which Lake Bluff is predominantly has. Missing middle housing is primarily about the form and scale of these buildings, designed to provide more housing choices in low-rise, walkable neighborhoods, although it tends to be more affordable than other new housing products currently being built. You see that little design there in the lower right, Opticos. That's a logo for a firm out of California. The founder of that firm, Daniel Perlak, he actually inspired this movement back in 2010 when he coined the term missing middle housing. And he described it as a transformative concept that highlights a time-proven and beloved way to provide more housing and more housing choices in sustainable, walkable places. And they're actually called missing because typically they've been illegal to build this type of housing product. If you look at that, it's that all that between mid-rise buildings and detached single-family homes. And since really post-war, they've been outlawed by most zoning code, that type of housing product type. And you know, that's the 2-flat, the 4-flat, bungalow courts, townhomes, not what you see here that gets built today. I mean, this is kind of like, it's like, I think of it as a grocery, right? Grocery, there's bulk economics, and then there's luxury groceries. It's the same with this type of building product. You see mass-produced single-family homes detached like that, and then the other kind of mid-rise, high-end luxury. That's what gets constructed today. Not a lot of anything in the middle, again, because it's not very, they're kind of complicated, complex deals, usually infill, and also because they're just, again, generally outlawed by most zoning codes these days. I put this slide together, and really I was doing another missing middle presentation a couple weeks back for the American Planning Association Illinois Chapter's conference, and one of the persons on the panel with me presented a factoid that I thought was unusual and kind of struck me as funny, but it said by 2030, 83% of the households in the United States would be without children. And that really struck me, and I thought, wow, let me look that up and see if that was really true. And I had a hard time linking that and finding that. There was some information that was a few years old that was similar to that, but I couldn't actually find that exact fact. But if you look, this is from the Harvard University's Housing Studies program, and the blue there on the far right side of 65 and older, the number of households that are going to be single-person households is going to grow dramatically through 2028. Likewise, married with children is also still going to grow some, but also married without children. So it didn't give me the exact 83% of the households, but the numbers look like there's the households that will be, I'll say, non-traditional nuclear families are growing out there. So a few years ago, Congress for New Urbanism Illinois had the idea to really mirror a design competition that was first done in Michigan, and they thought they would bring forward a very similar competition to generate interest and awareness about missing middle design, and that's how this all got started. And what the goals put forth were to really mirror what Lake Bluff's goals are, and that's to improve the quality of life in our existing neighborhoods, respect and complement the site, really the community, and the character of our area, and utilize affordable and creative design solutions that spur economic development and add local value. The village does not have these specific goals outlined in any of our long-range land use plans per se, but these do match up with, I think, the goals that the village had looking at this project. So the competition looked at 3 different properties. When I started off, I talked about how saying they wanted to have real or new ideas for real sites. So these were the 3 sites that were ultimately selected for the competition, one in Peoria, one in Chicago, and of course Lake Bluff. If you look at the bottom, very different areas, very different communities, wide-ranging populations and incomes. Interestingly, I've learned since this competition that the architect that was involved with the project helped manage it. She's told me that she's personally dealt with many more clients trying to solve missing middle issues in communities like Lake Bluff, more suburban communities that have more difficulty getting projects done, usually because of underlying land costs being so expensive. So why did Lake Bluff do this competition? I think Lake Bluff, the leadership decided that it was important for us to improve our tools for communicating the design intent for future redevelopment and evaluating proposals The village did try to achieve a downtown visioning program to help identify what was the type of architecture that we were hoping to have in Lake Bluff, and put a finer point on that. We've tried that in the past. We thought this would be another way to try to achieve something similar. We've also looked at this as to try to ensure that we can secure quality development that employs sound planning and design principles, to identify design elements that should be encouraged in the downtown, and promote themes and characteristics that are unique to Lake Bluff. Again, this ties back to the village's strategic planning initiative, to trying to examine what it takes to enjoy a variety of quality housing options in the community. Again, looking for new ideas and how to meet the growing demand for transitional housing. And I say transitional housing, I mean that in two senses. One, transitional in that we're trying to, largely when the village thinks about missing middle product type, is transitioning from our central business district to the surrounding single-family detached district. And also transitional in that we have folks that frequently communicate to the village that they are not desirous of staying in their large home on their large lot anymore and would like to have another product to move into so they can still remain part of the community. So as part of this competition, we provided the Congress for New Urbanism, who we saw as potential residents of any development like this, missing middle. And I think if you read these and look at them, it's the single teacher looking to be close to work. It's the retired couple who wants to stay in town, that probably travels to Florida for a good part of the year, but still maintains their memberships at a local country club and has their friends they want to be with and not leave. And a recent divorcee. You can probably imagine these folks. You probably know people like this in the community that have been looking for alternative housing products, and there's just not that many of them. This is some other information that we're given. We gave the Congress for New Urbanism when they set up the competition. These are our design standards. I kind of tried to distill these down to their essence, but this is what's in the village's zoning code. And the main one that really kind of summarizes all of them is the very first one, which is to maintain the intimacy of the central business district. That's really what it's all about, and all these feed into that. I won't read all of them, but that's really what this is all about. So these firms that are up here that are going to present their products, they had this information when they submitted their designs and thought about it, and we'll hear more about what their design process was. The site in Lake Bluff, it's in the upper left-hand corner there, Block 1. This exhibit is actually from the previous photo, I referenced earlier, the design guidelines we were trying to develop. This is from that document itself, but that Block 1, that's where the site was for the competition. This is an aerial of it where that red pin is dropped. Most of you here from Lake Bluff know where that is, right across from the metro station on the corner. It's an old gas station. The village actually owns the property in the upper northwest quadrant, and the balance of it is under single ownership, but it's that large parking lot and the 3-story building to the south. So with us tonight, again, are the two groups that submitted. It was a blind submittal in the competition, so we didn't know who they were. Interesting as it turned out, we had one of our own, Ed Deegan, who's on the Architectural Board of Review. His crew submitted, as did, Mary's here, and John's here from Morganti Wilson, which is a firm out of Evanston. And they also submitted. Because it was a blind submission, it was hard for me to find out who they were. I actually found out on Monday, and they agreed in very short order to come and make their presentation of what they submitted, so we're very grateful for that. But I think I'm going to turn it over to these guys, the pros, and Ed, if you'd start off, that'd be great. So Ed will go through and make their presentation of their submittal, which is there on the left, and then we'll give Mary and John a chance to do the same, and then we'll start our conversation.
Drew.
I don't think you did anything wrong.
Here we go. Thank you, Drew, and obviously appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about our project submission. And the basic premise and the concept that we were going after, really, I think the title sums it up: assembly required, and that's not a present you buy for your kids right before Christmas that you have to assemble for Christmas Day. But that's kind of the way we thought about it, in taking the numerous housing types that they're trying to address in the missing middle and taking a more modular approach to the architecture. And we were thinking about it both in the way that it could be addressed on the site in Lake Bluff and then any site, really anywhere. And so we came at it from two different schools of thought from that perspective. And obviously, you'll see the applicability to how we addressed conceptually here in Lake Bluff, but also how it could be very easily adapted to any numerous sites with any additional program requirements. So really, we look at this as a kit of parts that do two things: lessen the design time, which obviously ultimately lowers cost, which makes things more affordable. When you have a kit of parts that's already pre-designed, then you are lessening the initial time spent to make that applicable to a particular site. In addition to that, it creates flexibility. So when we talk about pre-designed types resulting in lower cost, hopefully the notion of affordability comes into play, and you can reach a wider audience. In addition to that, the easy response to varying program and requirements, again, allows flexibility to be used in a number of different ways and applications. With regard to creating flexibility, we also are looking at the modular approach for all of these different housing types being material selections, or being able to respond to the context that they're designed in. So what we have designed in Lake Bluff for this particular modular prototype would be different in Peoria, would be different in Chicago, would be different in any other city based on the context that we're trying to marry to. In addition to that, you look at the flexibility with regard to site considerations. We can modulate our approach with regard to pedestrian ways, vehicular traffic, solar and natural factors, and of course the streetscape and how we're addressing the marriage between say a central business district and single family housing. So the building types that we utilized, obviously the multifamily on the left, the mixed-use walk-up, the accessory dwelling unit, and of course the townhouse, which we did not actually address in this particular competition submission. So taking a look at our approach to the multifamily unit, again, it's a modular approach. It's supposed to be designed in a way that allows expansion horizontally and vertically. And when I talk about this, you can see we have just some very basic conceptual plans. The first floor, we're articulating a two-bedroom and a studio unit. We're stacking that again on the second floor with the identical plan. Third floor potentially could have a three-bedroom unit, and the fourth floor, which is really a half-story as we're calling it, which is housed within the roof, could have a one-bedroom and a studio. And this could be multiplied out in any number of ways. If you only have the requirements for a 2.5-story, you eliminate the third floor. Or if you need additional, you can add. So again, we're working off, a 30 by basically 32 module. And so when you look at the square footages allowed, everything is relatively tight, but when you link these buildings together, it allows you to meet potentially a more intensive program. So the mixed use and the walk-up unit, again, we pulled this program apart and we said, okay, this is also potentially a standalone unit. So the mixed use being the lower level is a commercial unit, and we can show you how we applied that to the Lake Bluff site specifically. And then there's a staircase for a walk-up with a one-bedroom loft unit. This really was only intended or designed to be expanded horizontally. In other words, we're taking these mixed-use units, these modulos, and adding them together horizontally with no intention to go vertical. The third piece of really the kit of parts is the accessory dwelling unit. This could be framed in many ways by what the missing middle has termed very small single family. So the first floor of this could be an ADA type unit where, for the, first floor living for seniors or what have you, where stairs is an issue, this could be a solution to that potential area of need. And then again, the second floor, which would be a walk-up. So this could be single-owned, it could be partitioned, but the thought was that, again, this was a modular unit that would be added to not vertically, but horizontally. And so the point here really is just to articulate the concept of any numerous ways that you can take these three typologies that I've articulated and move them around in any number of ways to solve the issues relatively quickly for any particular site, inclusive of the Lake Bluff site. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Kevin, one of my associates, who was a big contributor to the project.
Hi. So now that we've gotten a brief introduction about the modular type of concept that we're trying to introduce, I'm gonna take a second just to pull back and look at the site that we're given. Very fortunately, this site in Lake Bluff, it's probably the ideal site for a missing middle. For missing middle development, being that it has a lot of amenities within the 10-minute walking radius. So if you guys are very familiar with Lake Bluff, you have Sheridan Road, and the site is basically across the metro line, which provides an ease for transportation between downtown Chicago and basically the wider Chicago, greater Chicago area. And along East Scranton area, there is your commercial corridor providing, a lot of your restaurants, cafes, the public library is pretty close by, the village hall is close by, fire and police department are close by, the post office is close by. So basically this is really ideal site. So what we did was a quick study of what the amenities are around the area, just to really assess what is required and what our program would require us to provide and contribute to the community. So this is your aerial view of the existing site. Is that pointer? Oh, okay. So yeah, this big lot over here, it's where the proposed site would be. Right now, along Sheridan Road, you have existing mixed-use kind of walk-up building type. And along North Avenue, you have existing multifamily condominium building type. And along your East Scranton Avenue, you have the commercial corridor, and the metro station is right here. So basically just trying to understand what is existing and trying to really respect the building typologies, the existing building typologies in Lake Bluff. And up north, it's where all your single residential is. So trying to really create a development that will respect your transcend areas of commercial versus single family units, and how we can really create that nice intersection. And so this is what we came up with. We decided on doing 2 modules of the multifamily apartments, 3 modules of the mixed-use walk-up commercial spaces, and 2 modules of the accessory dwelling unit. Again, looking at Scranton Avenue, we decided to, still have that mixed-use commercial area, commercial building type along Sheridan Road, trying to wrap that commercial corridor around and really trying to attract the metro commuters and the bike trail pedestrians. We also had the multifamily apartments along North Avenue, really to just to kind of respect that large family building type and kind of bookend East Scranton and North Avenue. And we had the accessory dwelling units kind of tucked in the back of the site. And also, if you can see, we also created large green spaces, green open spaces, and courtyards just to really break up the site and to really break up the block and create this transparency within this development. So this is the site plan of what we're proposing using the kit of parts of the different modular units that we have. Again, we created a lot of courtyard and green spaces and really looking at the existing Scranton alley and trying to replicate that, really creating that nice little pockets of public space between this huge development and really trying to create that transparency between this building block. So this is the existing street view of along Sheridan Road. Again, you have the commercial property, commercial building type, walk up, and you have the mixed multifamily condominium at the back. And so this is what we envision. Again, we're respecting the village's ordinances, so respecting that 50-foot boundary setback line between the 2 boundaries, pushing back the commercial unit just to get a little bit more breathable space between the streetscape and the building, creating courtyards, proposing a pedestrian crosswalk just to bring your bike trail users and the metro commuters into this space, into this courtyard space that we created just to help break up that block. Introducing tall windows for natural daylight, ventilation, and also promoting eyes on the street for a safer neighborhood. Also, introducing balconies on these large multifamily buildings to really help activate the building facade and to provide social interactions between the neighbors and the streetscape. And also still continuing that tree-lined pedestrian friendly tree-lined streets just to promote pedestrian-friendly street design, and also introducing street parking on North Avenue and Sheridan Road just to really promote that the walkability concept. All right.
So again, just kind of a quick summary overview, and then we'll pass it off to the next. So really conceptually, our concept deals with the standardization of the kit of parts, which ultimately we hope would lower the cost and make this more attainable. We're addressing specific site conditions with scalable solutions. In terms of how we're responding to Lake Bluff specifically, we feel like we're trying to create that Scranton Alley, like spaces between the structures that we've created to really sort of engage with the landscape and make it a sort of a gentler, approach with that particular site. Responding well to, the multifamily to the east and the single family to the north, establishing a gentle sense of arrival at the intersection of the single family homes, multifamily, and the commercial activity and commuters. We hope the aim is to really attract a demographic and a life stage diversity and cross-pollinate residential life, commercial activity, and recreation. So that really is the summary of our scheme. The one comment I will make that I know will come up is parking. So just as the premise of the missing middle, and with regard to new urbanism, you know, the push is a pushback against the typical notion of what parking means and what the general requirements of today. So we get that we don't have the parking in our concept, but that's kind of the point, is that we're pushing back a little bit. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Could you unplug yours really quick?
Sure.
Mary, do you want to use mine, or you want me to pull around for you? Okay. No, I'll just come up here with it. This was in the PDF. This won't work. This. It's not picking this up. Thank you. It's official Halloween spooky sound effects.
Okay, so my name is Mary. I'm from Morganti Wilson Architects, and this is John Leonard. We're a group of 30 architects, designers, interior designers, and we're located in Evanston. We work in primarily single-family residential, but we are interested in multifamily units, and we felt like this project was a very interesting way to kind of explore that. And also we support, you know, diversity in housing, and felt like the competition was very interesting in that regard as well. We chose this project site option, not only because it was in the North Shore, but it was maybe one of the more interesting ones because of its proximity to the central business district and being across from the metro station. So we felt, you know, this is a natural place for densifying infill work. And as part of that, we were inspired by kind of the courtyard type building. And Chicago has a very rich history of a courtyard building type. Oops, sorry about that. And so if you look at the site plan here, you can see that it fills in the city block by building out to the extents kind of allowed by the, you know, the zoning code that you guys have here in place. We do have parking shown. You can kind of see from this aerial view of the site in the bottom left of the screen here. You access that off from Sheridan Road, so that keeps kind of the added car traffic of a dense housing unit off of the major street, keeping the kind of quiet nature of North Avenue at the north there.
Yeah, and then we wanted to keep the accessible unit, which would be mainly at the ground level facing North Avenue as well. And then the retail zone, we thought it'd be nice to have it on the corner there, so it kind of wrapped, the corner site.
And with it being a courtyard type building, we got 11 residential units in there, plus the commercial space. So it did offer kind of the opportunity to really maximize the density available at this site. So as John mentioned, on the first floor, you've got retail at the corner of North and Sheridan, so that kind of creates the active corner at your city block, and kind of, extends the central business district then around to that corner. The main entry to the residential units is through the court, and you can see as John mentioned, the accessible unit is on the first floor. And then as we come down, so here you can see this is Sheridan Road running this way. Parking, access through here. This is kind of the entrance to that courtyard. This here at the corner could be, have larger glass at the commercial space. And then as you come around to north, you have access to the accessible unit off of the first floor. So this one is what you see looking as you drive past on Sheridan Road. You'll have the garage entrance here and then commercial space at that corner. From North Avenue, again, you have the commercial at the corner, and then this is your access to that first floor unit. This is looking at the corner towards, I guess, North Avenue and Sheridan, right at that corner. And then we got 2 3-bedroom units, and that's kind of the premier unit is stacked above the commercial space. And we felt that was I did notice it's kind of larger than any of the units shown in the previous design. And this, there's certainly lots of flexibility that you can have in a building like this to kind of mix and match the different sizes of units. So we've got the 2 3-bedroom units here and here stacked. Then over at this side, those 3 were all 2-bedroom units. And then on the far side here of this perspective, there's a single bedroom at the corner and a studio behind that. And then at the very back of the building, there's another 1-bedroom. So you'd get, the courtyard also is great because it offers a lot of light into the building from all sides. And you'll see every unit has some sort of balcony space, which I think is very desirable kind of in today's market. I don't know
Well, we also felt that having the various unit sizes and within this density that it would create affordability. We also felt that creating the courtyard and then the green space on the east side and the north side sort of softened the building and its impact on the east neighbors. And then we felt that having the parking on the south end, it was just neighboring against the commercial parking that is to the south. And then have the courtyard facing the train station. And I think some of the partie or the design of the elevation was to be sympathetic with the surrounding commercial and the train station materials and aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of concludes our presentation, so thank you for having me.
So, before we turn it over to the panel in the room to have some conversation. I just wanted to, one of the things that Mary and John talked about was the zoning code. They did have the village's zoning code, and one of the things that I think the CNU Illinois, when they were doing this competition, didn't want to really have those restraints necessarily for design, because this was, about generating new ideas. And although I think you guys did a really good job of staying within the zoning in terms of, this particular site is presently zoned. It's in our CBD district, but it's the one block that actually has 3 stories that's permitted as of right. It's the only block that has that. And so their design was within that. I think Ed stretched it a little bit. But again, I think with some of the direction that they were given was like, here's the rules, you can know what they are, but this again was supposed to generate new ideas. So I think that was helpful in that regard. And again, same with parking. The village's regulations about parking when you have residential, we don't have that rigorous of a parking standard for units over the first floor. But nonetheless, it's really difficult to achieve parking in our central business district within the code that's written. I will tell you that Block 4, Block 2, and Block 1, all when they were redeveloped, got massive relief for parking. So that's a common thing that you see. In fact, it's in the planning world, I'm probably out beyond my expertise right now, but in the planning world, parking standards are getting reduced, and really, it's really shifting to what the developer thinks what they need and how they can achieve it, and not necessarily the old standards of 1 per 1,000 or 1 per whatever square footage metric they're going up against. So that's shifting in front of everyone's eyes, and even when you go into the city of Chicago and they're designing, well, I'll skip that. But what I'd like to do is jump to some questions, and I'll let our panels maybe start off, but they are not here to hog the microphone necessarily. So we have lots of skilled architects in the audience, and if there's other questions or thoughts that people can have, that'd be great. And even if, Ed, if you have questions of Mary and vice versa, I hope you guys could ask them. But let's start with Rob, perhaps, and maybe since Rob, you were the developer of Block 1, maybe you want to talk us through maybe how you approach design from a process for projects like this.
Well, Block 1 now has been 10 years since it's been there, so that process was like 12 years ago. So, but I can tell you that, I look at myself as more of a contextualist type individual, and what was the inspiration for that particular building was the John Griffith building where Bluffington's is located. That was really sort of the reference that we drew upon in generating that particular building. And I think as far as this site goes, I think what makes this site different from a context standpoint is, unlike Block 1, where the project I was associated with, all we had was really just a downtown and the village green, and which we saw that as an opportunity to bring closure to the village green and create a real nice space within the downtown. This particular site that we're looking at here does have a residential edge to it, and these are the challenges that I think make this site quite unique. Whenever you have 2 different zoning districts abutting each other, there's a whole kind of issue of transition that makes it challenging. I can't help but keep in the back of my mind too, what's been going on with Block 3 a couple of years ago, and these are unique, challenging sites that when we're talking about doing infill, there are a lot of forces acting on the perimeter, which can help inform what might occur within that particular parcel of land that's being looked at. So at least that's in very kind of a overview, glossy way how I look at how projects developed that I was associated with, and allowing context to provide information on really how the design should be influenced and evolve, so.
Scott, you're doing some transitional product right now, leaving Lake Forest CBD out, right? It's like a 2-family unit?
Yeah, a duplex unit.
Yeah.
In kind of up the street from some of the other kind of transitional type housing. So I think there's clearly a need, I think, for this type of housing in both in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff. I hear that echoed from people looking for places around town, and so it's a great concept. You know, in looking at this, I guess I have a couple of questions for, I mean, I don't know if we can go to questions or.
No, let's be informal, let's.
Okay. I don't know if you could maybe speak to kind of the materials that are contemplated for this project, or if you never really got that far, or if it's more just conceptual. And then also, I would be interested in, I don't know if you've ever did any sort of streetscape elevation which shows the relationship of the existing downtown buildings compared to the proposal, but I think that would be a helpful tool to kind of see scale between the relationships of the other buildings.
Ed or Mary, I don't know, John, or?
For ours, we had masonry in mind, just because of its proximity to the metro station and kind of that Main Street type of feel, you know, that is present in the central business district. But I have to imagine that, you know, once cost becomes a factor, that can always come into play. But certainly for the corner building, that's kind of what we had in mind.
Ed, my recollection for your
Sure.
product, you said you had a variety of skins you could
Yeah, I
put
mean,
on
I
it.
I think for what we were proposing for Lake Bluff, we had masonry shown on it. Ours has a little bit more of a modern or more contemporary approach to it, but it can be tailored. You know, we really didn't get into the level of detail because we were trying to, you know, articulate a larger concept at play that could be applicable to numerous sites. But the goal really for us would be, you know, here that we would have a combination of masonry and, you know, brick, kind of to match the, you know, Block 1 buildings. In addition to that, play off the train station, and then, you know, wood or clapboard siding that would be horizontal. In addition to that, to try to break up the modulation in the bays. So.
Yeah, I would say that when Mary and I sat down when we were first reviewing it, our building had more of a contemporary bent to it, and then we were looking at wood and stucco and metal materials for it. But as we were heading towards the latter part of the design, we were influenced by the train station and, you know, the neighboring commercial area. And so that's when we turned towards the more classical details and the brick being a softer, more, as you would say, contextual material.
And then in terms of the overall height, are these consistent with the other buildings in the downtown area? Are they higher, or?
Yeah. Oh. So, I mean, we did do a isometric study of the surrounding buildings. And, you know, we did try to, like, really bookend the North Avenue side and also kind of mirroring that with East Scranton, trying to bookend that block. Yeah, so.
Ask him to pull that.
Yeah. So if you look at that, basically, on your left of North Avenue, it's where there's this thing, multi-family condominiums are, and then on your top is Block 1, which is your commercial. That's the bank, the brewery, the food mart. So basically, just trying to understand how that entire kit of parts really sit in the site. And again, like for material textures, I think our main idea, it's really not to dwell into the specific materiality of of the building, but really just to convey that idea that it's very flexible. You can increase the building height, you can increase the building size, you can really change the building material according to its context. Like here in like Bluff, you'll probably use masonry or, you know, clapboard siding, but in Chicago, when we are downtown, you can use more like contemporary materials like metal panels or, you know, stucco or, you know, a more contemporary look. So it's really just conveying that idea of the flexibility of this concept to really show that. So what really differentiates the projects is really the design cost. So what we're saying is that, look, we are designing the bones for you. And so you have this selection of different modules that you can take with and cut your design cost by, let's say, 20, 30%. And then you put that in your specific site and really look at the site conditions and then really try to then dive into, you know, the materiality where the site positions of different building types are placed. So that's the main concept between assembly required.
And the kind of overall building height of our building was around 35 feet, which I believe was the kind of max building height allowed for that block. So certainly we didn't, you know, measure any of the buildings, but I believe it would fit in with kind of the bank around the corner, and also the building that was at the site is, you know, currently I think three stories. So I don't think it will, you know, kind of feel too tall in that area. You know, I think it fits in pretty nicely at that height. Yeah.
Can I want to put this on, I hope it's working. Yeah, this is just for, because we're filming this so people can enjoy it at home and we can sell lots of ad revenue for this. But I'm going to go up here, because I am not an expert in design at all, but one of the things that struck me, and I think I had a conversation with you about this, Mark, is one of the things that struck me as unusual is that for somewhat assembly required is that the tallest structure was kind of like the bookmark, right? Or sorry, the bookend, yes, thank you. Kind of making a punctuation mark, and then the green belt moved north, and I thought, well, that was, when I first saw that, I said, well, that was completely counterintuitive, because usually in my head, it would be like the opposite of that, where you're stepping down the reverse of that. And, but I've had a conversation with Bob about, and Rob, you may remember this from Block 1, and maybe how that got started, and the debate about whether that should be 2 or 3 stories. I don't know, Bob, you want to talk about that a little bit? This is Bob Hunter, he's our ABR chair, emeritus.
Yeah, I got fired. I didn't know I got fired. Yeah, I can remember talking, I don't really remember my logic on that discussion. I do remember having a discussion. But to me, it was not that much taller than Larry Booth's series of buildings next door. At least I don't think it is. But it's set back a bit. I really didn't have a problem with it, and it is a bookend, because if I remember right, when Rob did Block 1, the building height was, the requirement was 34 feet, and we ended up going to 35. Am I right, Bob? Do you
That's
remember
right.
that?
That's a detail that's escaping me at this
Yeah,
point, but
I
it was
don't-
within, I think the only variance we got was for the cupola, I think.
It was really to make sure that you could get 3 stories in there, even though it modulated, you know, vertically, it's not just a flat wall. And it stopped the axis from apart. It was a great way to stop things. And I think the backside of the building is just sort of the backside of the building, except for the bank. And this, because of the bank is the shape it is on the backside, it's a lower scale, or appears to be a lower scale. So I think what Ed has done and his group is they kind of worked their way back up. But it's still, because of the sloping roofs, the only thing that's tall really is the peak of the roof. As long as I got the microphone in my hand, one of the things that I think needs to be addressed in any of these kinds of things, there's a couple of things. But we always talk about mixed use and retail. But we don't know what retail is anymore. And so we make a lot of big space and a lot of grand ideas about what retail is, but we don't know what goes in there, because there's already a lot of empty retail space. And I had suggested to Ed, after he had done that, I said, you know, you've got all your retail on the front on Sheridan Road. For what reason? Because you've got some really nice little courtyards, and if you take some of those and turn them around, and they become internal retail spaces that are really geared towards the people that live in the place, and somehow you could connect it more into the town itself, which is not available pedestrian-wise to, other than crossing Bob's parking lot and things.
Just to be clear, Bob, you're like picking these up and turning these around?
Well, not necessarily all of them. You know, you start to modulate the front too, because you don't want to ignore everything off of the Sheridan Road. But again, it's what is retail? Right now, retail is take care of yourself shops. And so, you know,
Service.
the little stores are kind of have gone away. So the other thing is, based on what you said and my own personal experience now, of getting to be old, this does not necessarily address folks like myself who really don't want to go up the stairs anymore. And it wasn't necessarily intended to. But I think in the grand scheme of things, we need to start thinking more about that. And based on your demographic thing, you know, there are more people like me around now.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think is an issue that, you know, I see these townhouses going up all over the place, and you've got to go up 10 steps to get to the first floor, because and it's like, that makes no sense. I'm sorry, I can't buy that. You know, it's, you know, the last thing you want to do is have one of these wooden ramps going up to your place. So the idea of not necessarily ADA accessible, that's important too, but just people that are aging that cannot, my wife has got 2 artificial knees, 2 artificial hips, and back surgery. It's hard to go up and down stairs anymore. And I got a fairly large house, and it's got lots of stairs. So anyway, so that's enough about that. I think as far as Morgani Wilson's, you know, when I first saw that, I thought, well, that doesn't have anything to do with Lake Bluff. And what bothered me was the giant arches. And I don't really want to talk about architectural stuff. But the same comment about the retail that's on the corner, very prominent corner, but I always wonder what it is, besides for rent signs. And it has, in parts of it, it's got almost an industrial character, which I don't mind. We had a scheme for block 3, 4, which whatever block it was.
It's block 3.
That one of the schemes, earlier schemes, had an industrial-looking building on the corner, which a lot of people didn't like. I loved. I'm just going to ramble. I like the courtyard idea. Evanston is full of them. Yeah, the city is full of them. They don't always make anything happen in those courtyards, which is kind of a danger. Anyway, okay. Anybody else want to talk?
You want to add to the conversation yet? Anyone? I will add that when I first saw this project too, I saw this garage opening there. I said, wow, they really did their homework. That is a nod back to the old gas station that was there. So these guys are incredible. Let's go back.
That was before your time.
Yeah. Kathy, what was their original? Was that what was that? Was it a Nash dealership on the corner?
Where?
Oh, that's a little, yeah.
No, that was further up. where
Okay.
our sales was.
Okay.
That was an Albertson's 1920s gas station.
Okay. So, our esteemed panelists, do you have any thoughts on these proposals that haven't already been shared? Feel free to dance around these questions if you like, if you want to
Well-
jump around.
Honestly, I think they both have, you know, a lot of viability. They're both very different. So one picking up on more residential forms with the gable form, the other being, you know, the Chicago courtyard typology, which is a nice historic reference. That's one thing that's unique about Chicago is those buildings. Yeah, I think, you know, The modular approach is really thinking outside the box, which is, you know, it's very unconventional in many ways from what one would typically think. So I think that's kind of refreshing. But, you know, I think as far as some of these other questions, I guess, you know, I think one thing that I would like to see, and I think, well, bear with me, is it too much for me to be looking at this, of these two schemes and still be thinking about the other parcels in town and just how this process is probably hoping help inform how those properties might evolve over time here too, that being the PNC property, and I think it's a Block 3, it's the one in the, no, it's Block 2 is the bigger one in the middle. And-
Block 3 is this, as the PNC former
Right,
Northern
right.
Trust, yeah.
So what we're looking at here with the remaining portion of Block 1 may very easily be very informative to any sort of guidelines that might be developed toward those two blocks. Would that be a
That's a
safe-
fair statement.
Okay. Because then you'd like to also see some incentives potentially being worked on here of how to try to get to an end result that everyone will be happy with. I think one thing that I've seen certainly on the residential side in Lake Bluff is the open air porch allowance or bonus. And it's very effective in an end result, which is basically for the streetscape, covering up what might end up being a 18, 20-foot vertical wall with a porch, which breaks it down and makes it much more compatible to the streetscape. That bonus has actually translated into a nice result. Lake Forest has done other things too in that manner. I think they've got in their guideline book on the bulk, they also get into dormers, porticos, breezeways. I see Kathy here, she knows the book better than I do, but there are other elements that will apply toward, you know, incentives of how to get square footage without being penalized, at the same time helping break the facade down, break down the wall, so it isn't so abrupt. And I think that's the thing that I'm concerned about is how do you transition from commercial multi-use zoning into the R4 residential to the north of North Avenue. And when you have two different zoning districts abutting, you know, there's always tension points there. And so that is, I think, where the creative juices can really flow, is how do you soften those edges so that, you know, you have the whole community really buying into this, because we do need this housing type, no question. There is a gap. I agree 100% with Bob on that. I've known too many people who've had to move out of town because there is no product for them to move into as far as getting out of a single-family home. And that diversification would be a real asset for the town. The question is, how do you do it, and how do you make it compatible to a residential district immediately to the north of all three of these properties? So that's my thinking, is how do we get a carrot out there to get results that the community can really buy into? My thoughts.
It occurs to me that, you know, 100 years ago, or maybe not that long ago, that there was a huge amount of duplexes and all kinds of housing types in Lake Bluff. I happen to live in one of them that started out as a 15 by 30-foot, you know, original church cottage, and has been added on to all over the place, but at one point in time was a full-blown duplex. And there's still a lot of pieces of property that are not the 25 or 50 footers that could accommodate a duplex without having to look like anything. My house doesn't look like a duplex, but it was, and it's not hard to do. So I think it, going beyond just looking at how many pieces can we get on a piece of property, it could be possible to say, you know, this property is 100 feet wide. Doesn't mean, nobody wants to build the McMansions anymore, but by golly, we can build a fairly good-sized place, and it could be a duplex, or if big enough, even a triplex. So that's just something to think about, is sort of spotting things around. I just was up in Minneapolis over the weekend. My son's an architect up there. Minneapolis is in the process of getting rid of all of their residential zoning, period. They're single-family residential, I'm sorry. So that they're kind of, they haven't figured it out yet how they're gonna do it. There's obviously gonna be some rules, but there's not just gonna be this whole area is zoned single-family residential. And that's a pretty large city to be thinking that way.
Anybody have any? Yeah, thanks, Deb.
Hi, I just have a question and maybe I'm looking at them too quickly, but if, to the point about older people not having the capability of walking up all that quickly or desire to walk up all that quickly, do these plans not work if you were to do an elevator in them, or can the space be reworked to have some kind of accessible elevator? Was
Yeah,
that thought of at all, I
The
guess?
courtyard could certainly, that building type, because there's a lobby, you could certainly add an elevator in there, making all of those upper units accessible.
And the other kind, would those be possible for elevator, or?
Yeah, there's definitely a vertical circulation space in the mixed use, the mixed multifamily residential units. So that's definitely, you know, something that was considered for. Elevators obviously are really expensive for this kind of scale, you know, so there is obviously thought to that, and that idea of vertical circulation could become
Okay.
that space.
Great,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Anybody have any? Scott, anything?
Yeah, no, I think I would also echo some of Rob's thoughts, and that I think the challenge of these projects is really kind of working to minimize the massing and the scale of these projects, juxtaposed against kind of the economics of the deal, of the project. And I think there are ways to do that. You know, I see 3-story walls and 4-story walls, and as Rob said, maybe there's a way to soften the edges. I think most of downtown Lake Bluff actually has a 2-story cornice line on most of the buildings, and then the 3rd floor is kind of tucked under a roof structure with dormers, and that really does help to bring down the scale to more of a pedestrian-friendly type feel. So. But I know it's hard when you're trying to achieve a certain density and make the economics work, so that's the challenge.
Yeah, I guess, you know, real quickly, and what Scott was saying, I mean, that's what we did with the 3rd floor elevations on the Block 1. You know, one section of it has a small parapet wall. Now, we definitely lost square footage doing that. The central spot has got more of a mansard roof, but really minimal loss of square footage, but it dropped the eave line down to scale it at least closer to what the rest of downtown is doing. So yeah, there's a lot of things to be done, but I think that's probably the one thing that, unfortunately, I think we all saw the public debate on those 2 previous projects on the Block 3 PNC property, and you know, I'd like to win those people over and find a solution that will meet our goals with housing need, be able to hit the square footage that you need on a property to make it viable, and to give it the aesthetic that you know, is compatible to the character of downtown, or certainly to the greater Lake Bluff area. So, but I'm excited by what I've seen here. I think they're both very different schemes, but both really have great potential. So I'm encouraged.
Thank you for that, Rob. I think there is a lot to be learned from this, and one of the things that we were grateful for this competition was to allow professionals of this caliber to think about Lake Bluff, to think about sites in town, knowing that they are difficult to develop, underlying land basis is so high, and to put these minds to it, to come up with these creative ideas, and that's been, I think, very helpful for us. We've talked about a lot internally. I know the chairs of each of the villages' advisory boards have talked about the projects, and I think we're hopeful that we can glean from this some points to inform the development community that maybe there's some nuggets here that can help them in the future when they come forward. And I would expect things to come forward sooner than later. I mean, that's the way it works. We were sitting in front of the community doing a design charrette, if you will, for the downtown, and meanwhile there was developers working, and I didn't even know it, to submit plans, and then lo and behold, they submitted in advance of those design guidelines being complete. And it's a dynamic process, so they're always at work, and so we're always at work, and it's but we are grateful for your time and energy that you put into this. And before I call the evening to a close here, I don't know if anybody else had anything to add or share about this. If not, I certainly, again, want to applaud your time and energy you put into this. It hasn't been said yet, but Ed Deegan's project actually was a award winner in this overall project for the Congress for New Urbanism Illinois chapter. It was a merit finalist, I believe, because of, I think it was awarded because of its utility, and that you can pick it up and put it down in all these different sites. And the design panel there was impressed by that. So, but again, thanks to both of you. I'd like to, if we could, give them a round of applause for submitting. So thank you again, and I also would like to thank Rob and Scott for helping us out tonight and serving our panel. Thank you, guys. That's it. Thanks to you all for coming out. Happy Halloween.